So I've been getting these clips on YouTube Shorts for this series with Catherine the Great, and it's very irreverent, if you know what that word means, where like you take something that's very serious and you make fun of it. The show is very irreverent and it's so funny, and I haven't seen the full show just because I've seen all of these clips and shorts. But it made me really interested in Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia. And I eventually want to see the show, but it also made me curious about Catherine and her life in general. And so I quickly Googled best books for Catherine the Great. And the one that came up was Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman by Robert Massie. And so I got it from the library and I've been reading it. At this point, I'm about halfway through and it's fascinating. So I wanted to do a podcast episode on it because I think most people obviously aren't going to read this book because she's thick. It is dense and not a lot of people read biographies. I mean, I don't read biographies. I read romance novels. It just happened to happen upon this book and it's really good. And so I want to tell somebody about it. And so I'm telling you. My initial reaction when I opened up the book was, God damn, it is thick. And by that, I mean like the very first paragraph takes up almost the entire page. So this book must have been written back when people actually sat down and read books and didn't have social media and, you know, they probably had television. 2011, copyright 2011. Huh. Yeah. I mean, it probably took him forever to write it. But like nowadays, a paragraph is what? Like a couple of sentences, right? Like it's so dumbed down. And so even me, who likes to be nerdy sometimes, like looked at that first page of that paragraph and I'm like, well, I'm intimidated. I might close this thing and call it a day. But I didn't. I thought, it's fall turning winter here in Minnesota and I'm gonna snuggle up with a book and I'm gonna give it a try. And if it's dry as dust, then I can let it go into the wind. But at least I'll give it a try. And I was immediately captivated. Robert Massie, I don't know if you're still around and alive and kicking it, but like very impressive. And I'm going to read your other books, I think, because he does just this great job of keeping it interesting and you're on your toe. Like you constantly want to read the next paragraph, the next sentence, whatever. And he does a great job of like laying it out without being dry, etc. I will admit that I have a pretty good vocabulary, and I gotta say, probably once a page or so, there is a word that I have never heard of in my life, never even seen before. And I'm like, what? I'm a moron. And on one hand, like, you know, there are other words, it's in a sentence, obviously. So you can just like skip over it and keep going and you don't necessarily need to know what that word is. But instead I had my phone next to me, obviously, as we all do. And so I was like, well, I'll just Google what this word means. Well, by the fifth one, I was like, this is slowing me down to like toggle between my book and my phone. So I just started writing down all of the words that I didn't know, and I'm gonna like look them up later. Here's a couple that I have written down. Irascible, erudiation, avuncular, and I can't read my handwriting on this one, mumbund, I think, etc. Anyway, so yes, it is an intimidating book, I will grant you that. And like I said, I'm about halfway through, but it is well written and very interesting. It keeps you on the edge of your toes with all of its court intrigue and all of those things. So I do recommend it. Please don't take that like list of words that I just gave as a reason not to read the book, because you can easily just like skip over the words you don't know and keep going and you'll still understand the full story, so who cares? So I want to tell you about what I have learned thus far about Catherine the Great, because like I said, and I think it's obvious, it's fascinating. So, Catherine the Great was not born Catherine the Great. She was born Sophia in this place called Austria, Germany, completely different place. She was born in Germany, and she was born a princess, a very minor princess, and her parents' relationship was not great, as was very common in the time. They were married out of the mutual benefit for both of the both of the families, rather than like actual love for each other or even compatibility. Like their personalities were so different. Like her dad was really, if he had 4 walls and a chair, he'd be like, the chair is too much, like we need to be frugal. We need to be very miserly. And whereas her mom was born into a lot of like education and balls and fascination, and there was this age difference, right, where he was significantly older and she was younger and still ambitious and driving and climbing the social ladder and the hierarchy. And then she gets the mom, Joanna, got married to this guy, where like all of a sudden she's in the middle of nowhere in this, to her, rinky-dink castle, where she's like, okay, he's a prince, but like, ugh, right? So that is Sophia, eventually Catherine's mom. Very ambitious. And Sophia starts having conversations about her own eventual marriage when she's like 8 or 10, right? Because this is the 1700s, where people got married very young, and it was the way that they moved up in the world, right? So those conversations started very, very early. So if she's in Germany, how in the world, a couple of decades later, does she end up as the Tsar of Russia? Super good question. Glad you asked. So in Russia, there is Empress Elizabeth. And Elizabeth ascended onto the throne, the tsardom, out of a coup. So somebody else was on the throne, and then now as I'm saying it out loud, I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but anyway, we have Empress Elizabeth is currently the Tsar of Russia, but she became the Tsar of Russia when she was older. And she was unmarried because of some political reasons at the time, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really matter. The point is that she is not married and doesn't have any children and can't bear children. And she has just taken over the throne. And she's like, well, I kind of need to figure out who my heir is going to be to like lock this shit down, right? Like who's going to be next in line? Well, Elizabeth, had an older sister, Anna, whom she loved, like just was incredibly devoted to Anna. And Anna, a long time ago, had gotten married and moved to Europe with her husband, and they had had a son. And now Anna has passed away, but her son, who's like 8 or so at the time, Peter, Elizabeth's nephew, is still alive. And so Elizabeth is like, yo, Peter, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, come to Russia and be my heir. So she grabs Peter and says to Russia, this is my heir to the throne. Little bit of a problem. So Peter is from Holstein, which is like, I don't remember, it's, like I know that you can get like Holstein beef now, so I guess that's somewhere Germany/Netherlands-ish. And anywho, he moves, but the problem is that he still, like, he deeply believes in Europe and all of that stuff. And so when he comes to Russia, he thinks Russia is insanely primitive and has absolute disgust and disinterest in this backwoods country, right? And Elizabeth is like, no, this is your inheritance. It is your fatherland. Like, you must learn the language right? Because he doesn't speak Russian. You must learn the religion which is Orthodoxy, and he was raised Lutheran, which to them was very different, right? Not as different as now we think of like Christianity versus like Islam, but like to them at the time, it might as well have been as different as that, right? So she's trying to get him to convert from being a Lutheran to being Orthodox, and he's like not interested. And like, I don't know how to say this, but also Peter is super dumb. Like he's like a box of rocks. And a lot, like part of that is like the cards you're dealt in your genetic genes, or like whatever God has given you for your intellectual abilities or even interest and curiosity, right? So like part of that is just like the hand he's been dealt, but part of it is when he was growing up, he had somebody looking over him. His guardian was like this terrible, evil man that constantly beat him physically and mentally, just like downtrodden. And so he is this very sickly, petulant child that has a disgust for primitive Russia. And Elizabeth is like, oh, I didn't foresee that, didn't sign up for this. And she tries really, really hard to like change him, like change his mind and heart and give him the right tutors. And he just has no interest. And I'm at the point of the book now where he's like in his 30s, he still plays with dolls, like toy soldiers. That's what he wants to do. He wants to march toy soldiers back and forth in his bedroom day after day, night after night. He doesn't want to run a country or a kingdom or a tsardom. He wants to play with toys. This is what Empress Elizabeth in all of her glory has been dealt. And she's like, well, shit. That's not going to work. But maybe instead, we just, like, maybe I just need a grandson, right? Like, what if, well, I guess Peter's not her son, he's her nephew, but like, whatever. Peter needs to get married and have a child, and then I will craft that child to be the future Tsar of Russia. And how does that loop in our great heroine? Well, of course, Elizabeth like looks around her and around at all of her connections and is like, who is a young woman that I can bring to Peter? And remember how I said that Sophia, eventually Catherine's mom, Joanna, is very ambitious and has been thinking about how to marry her daughter off for a long time. She reaches out to Elizabeth because there's a little bit of a connection there. And Elizabeth had never been married, but she had once been engaged to Joanna's brother or something like that. But then the brother died and they never ended up getting married. It's something like that. Anywho, additionally, when Sophia, eventually Catherine, and Peter were both very young, they did engage and have like a couple of positive interactions, right? So Elizabeth is like, good enough, come on over to Russia. And so Sophia, eventually Catherine, and her mom, Joanna, come, and I'm just gonna start calling Sophia Catherine because I can't remember when that name change happened. I think it's when Catherine was eventually finally engaged to Peter officially. Okay, so this sounds like a really good plan, right? Again, not a great match in terms of marriage because Joanna was brought up with all of this sparkling education, which she has also given her daughter, who we're now calling Catherine, right? And Catherine was raised with an incredible governess whom she was absolutely devoted to and loved, and like just really fed her mind, heart, spirit, soul. And so she is this like enlightened woman, and she is engaged to Peter. That's gonna be a little bit rough. But interestingly, Catherine does have a very good temperament in general and is very kind to Peter it's quite evident that he's not going to be like the love of her life or anything. But whenever he talks to her about like, oh my God, he's so embarrassing. Like the things that he says out loud. Like, have you ever been with a person who just has like zero social skills and you just like cringe because they say exactly the wrong thing and you're like, oh? Or have you been around a person who like thinks they're super smart and they're dumb as a box of rocks? That is like both of those people in Peter. And if it were me with this guy, I'd be calling him out on his dumbassery like constantly. But God bless Catherine and her sweet soul. She just ends up being like his confidant, and she doesn't like, what's the right word? Reproof him, like correct him. She doesn't correct him because she's like, he's going to be my husband. Plenty of people have tried to correct him and like, he doesn't like them. And I would certainly like my husband to like me. That would be preferable. And so she is just like incredibly kind to him, right? Okay. There's also a lot of political stuff going on. Joanna and Elizabeth get crosswise with each other, and eventually Elizabeth marries Peter and Catherine and is like, they don't need a chaperone anymore. So Joanna, get the fuck out of my country, you dumb bitch. So this woman who was like climbing the social ladder, Joanna, like reached its summit and then got like pushed off the other side, and it was just, she failed major. She thought she was big shit and was not. Catherine was really sad to see her mom go, which is interesting because she and her mom had a very difficult relationship. Joanna never really wanted Catherine like as a child, and so there was not a lot of like maternal instinct or love between the two of them. And it's in a lot of ways like the reason that Catherine can handle Peter is because she was raised with Joanna. I keep saying that name weird. But she was raised with this like unloving mother. And so she's like, yeah, if I'm going to be marrying an unloving husband, like kind of like same shit, different person, you know what I mean? So, ironically, anyway, it doesn't matter. So now we've got Elizabeth still in power as the Tsar. Joanna returns to Germany with her husband and doesn't enter the picture again. So we've got Elizabeth on the throne as the Tsar, and we have Peter and Catherine have officially been married. And then they don't have sex for 7 years. That is wild. So the author, Robert Massie, talks about that and is like, well, when Catherine went into her wedding night, she didn't know what to expect, to the point that she didn't know that male and female anatomy was different. Right? Like, this is a different time. This is the 1700s. Like, people do not talk about these things. It's wildly inappropriate, blah, blah, blah. And she tried, like, Catherine tried. She asked her ladies in waiting, her maids, but they were as virginal and naive as she was. She tried asking her mom, and her mom, like, reprimanded her for even asking and scolded her. And blah, 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 because of course Joanna had gone into her marriage bed not knowing anything either, and she was basically like, you'll figure it out. So Catherine at least tried. Peter, on the other hand, and this can't like necessarily be known, like historians don't know every single detail of everything, but you can hypothesize. And with Peter not consummating the marriage, from his perspective, there was probably both physical and psychological barriers. So physically, they think he had a condition which I don't know how to pronounce, but one of the French kings, Louis the 15th or something, apparently had this condition, and he was married and they didn't consummate the marriage, and once the surgeon came in and did a little fix up, he immediately sired a son, right? Louis the 15th or whoever he was. And so the historians are hypothesizing that that is also what Peter was experiencing. So to get excited would be really painful for him. That's the physical aspect. Oh, the other physical aspect is like, this dude is really immature, both mentally and physically. He's like 18 when they get married, and he like hasn't gone through puberty. Like the surgeons and the doctors were telling Elizabeth, like, I think that you need to wait before you marry them because he's not ready. And Elizabeth was like, I need them to get married and sire a son. Like, time's up, let's go, right? So he's very like, he's just not physically there. So it might have been like a physical condition, and it might have been just like, he just like hasn't matured. And then there is the psychological barrier. So think about the dynamic that we have discussed where Peter is not smart and this guy, like the only friends that he ever had as a child were the lowliest of servants who were probably being his friends because they were servants. And they were also people that he could like smack around, right? If they got out of line or if they displeased him. Compare his total ignorance. He's not physically attractive. He plays with dolls and toys, compared to Catherine, who I think is a year younger than him, so around 17 when she gets married, but she is youthful, charming, exuberant. Everybody loves her. She's super well educated. Like the psychology of, I, Peter, am gonna go into this marriage bedroom where I'm not really sure what's supposed to happen. I just know that I'm supposed to do something that results in a child somehow. And I'm gonna go into that experience, that fumbling intimacy, that vulnerability, that rawness and openness for like shame and discomfort with somebody who he's gotta know is his superior in pretty much every way other than title. And that's why they didn't have sex for 7 years. Like, shit. I think eventually what happens, and again, historians don't know for sure and know every detail, but they think that Peter, like Elizabeth, after 7 years is like, let's go, people. You need to give me a son, right? And Peter gets drunk with his friends, supposedly, and they say something to him about this physical condition that he might have, and he's like drunk because this man likes to drink, and a lot. I mean, he's in Russia, but I also, like, Russians can drink for sure, but I also think that, yeah, he's just a drunkard across the board. Anywho, they're all drunk, and like long story short, it's a weird night, and a surgeon comes in and does a little snippy snip. Maybe, supposedly, allegedly, I don't know. But they also, for sure, find a widow and convince her to initiate him into manhood, let's say. And so he does eventually. Actually, I don't remember if Catherine and Peter themselves ever actually have sex with each other. I can't remember that point. Because Catherine ends up having, at least at this point in the novel, 3 affairs, which are all very secret, and Peter kind of knows about them. I mean, he's with his other mistresses, or he's like chasing other women all the time too. And so he kind of just like shrugs his shoulder because he doesn't mind being cuckolded because like he couldn't give 2 shits, right? But she does end up having 3 children. Again, thus far in the novel, she might have more, I couldn't tell you. But her first one is named Paul. So he is the child that Elizabeth has wanted and desired, and is the whole reason that Catherine came to Russia in the first place, right? And this is from another man. So she has 3 children eventually by 3 different dudes. This is the first dude, and the second one is a baby girl who ends up passing away, and the third one is a boy, and I can't tell you what happens to any of them, well, the 2 living sons yet, because I'm not that far in the novel yet. But when she has her first one, Paul, with, you know, handsome stud number 1, Peter, her husband, says, yes, I am the father. And I think he claims to be the father of all of them, although he knows for sure that he's not. And like, everybody's just like, shh, like, who cares? We have an heir, so like, let's all roll with it. Well, when Catherine gives birth to Paul, Elizabeth takes him. Imagine being a first-time mother and your child is taken from you. And I don't mean for like an hour or a day or a quick whatever. I mean like Elizabeth is like, I have been wanting a child for so long and I can't physically have one, and now a baby is here and it's mine. And like views herself as Paul's mother / the future heir to the throne, right? And just the deep, dark depression that Catherine goes into after that experience. And just like, nobody cares about her. Nobody checks on her. She is a vessel for the heir. She like lays bleeding and broken after childbirth for like hours because nobody comes to check on her because nobody gives a shit about her. And then like the postpartum depression thereafter, you can imagine. But she does eventually rise from her postpartum depression and bedroom, and with this like renewed fire of just like, fuck you all, which good on her. And so Elizabeth essentially raises Paul. And so Catherine and Paul don't have like a super close maternal relationship. Anywho, there's a bunch of other stuff that happens with like who else Catherine sleeps with, and she has the daughter that ends up dying at like 18 months or something like that, and then another dude that she eventually, and then it's all like many chapters about how they avoided detection so that nobody would know she was having these affairs, blah, 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 blah. I'm gonna skip over some of that stuff. I was at some points wanting to Google, like, why is Catherine the Great called the Great? Like, what does she do? You know what I mean? Because like at this point, she's not on the throne yet. Elizabeth is still alive, but like, anywho, that's a side note. I'll come back to that. Anywho, Elizabeth still on the throne. Eventually, she dies. As you can imagine, nobody likes Peter, right? The nephew that's supposed to take over the throne, which he does in December of 17 something. I'm not sure the exact date. December of 17 something. Nobody likes Peter, but he is obviously heir to the throne. So everybody just accepts him as the future czar. And he steps into power in December, and then he starts making mistake after mistake after mistake, because who does he love? Europe. He doesn't love Russia. He fucking hates Russia. He thinks they're primitive Neanderthals, even though he's lived there for more than half of his life. He's like, fuck these people. And so he makes all of these changes where he goes to the Russian army and he changes their uniform to look like the European army, the Prussians, right? Russia is different than Prussia. Russia and Prussia are enemies. And like, they have been fighting years-long wars. And now all of a sudden Russia has a czar that's like, Prussia is BFF. I fucking love that, because that's where he was like raised essentially, right? He thinks that they are smart and cool and amazing, and Russia is primitive. And so like, I don't understand why my Aunt Elizabeth has been at war with these Prussia guys all of this time. The King of Prussia is super cool. Let's hang with him. And he makes his Russian guards remove their old uniform and start wearing these like Prussian or Holstein uniforms to the point that even dumb things like, obviously in Russia it gets very, very cold, so they would have thick uniforms and thick coats, and now they're changed to these like thin coats. I'm like, yeah, that's the people you want to piss off, the people with the guns. Cool, you know. And there's a lot of just like shock, horror, and indignation amongst the army. I mean, they keep their mouth shut, but they do not fucking like Peter, right? For that reason and a bunch of others. So he's pissed off the army. Okay. One piece of the puzzle. Not a big deal. You make one mistake, you're okay. Don't worry, Peter makes more. For example, what else does he hate about Russian? The religion. Orthodoxy, right? Men with the long beards, he makes them shave them. He takes away their power. He pisses off the church, right? Because he was raised Lutheran or whatever. So now you have the army and the church that hate you. Cool. Oh, the other reason that the army hates him. Okay, remember how I said that Russia and Prussia were enemies? Well, they've been fighting wars and Russia has been winning land, but in winning land, they've been like spilling Russian blood, right? Like their countrymen have died to get this land. And as soon as Peter comes in power, he goes, JK, let's give all that land back to Prussia in the name of peace. Holy shit, I'd be pissed. Holy shit, I would be pissed. And so 45 seconds ago, Russia was allies with Austria and France against Prussia. And then, whoop, on a dime, Russia and Prussia are BFF because of Peter. And Austria and France, the previous allies, are like, what the fuck? What do you mean? Like, they're like, I don't even know if they're panicking. They're just confused, right? They're pissed, but they're also confused. And Peter's response is basically like, this 7 years long war, this is the 7 years war, it's gone on too long. Somebody has to be the adult in the room and step forward and call it quits, call it peace, right? Dude, the King of Prussia is thanking his lucky stars because before Peter stepped in to and took over the throne, he was like writing letters where he was like, it's over. Like, I am so screwed. He thought he was done for, right? Like 45, and he's like, I'm screwed. Like Prussia, like he was in a bad spot. And then boom, Elizabeth dies. Peter comes to power. Peter's like, oh my God, King of Prussia, I love you. And Prussia's like, well, that's okay, I love you too. But of course, all of the Russian people are like, damn, we spilt all of this blood. And the church is like, you're making all of these changes. And nobody's happy with Peter. I'm trying to remember if there are other problems that he creates. Probably. I just can't remember off the top of my head. Meanwhile, Catherine is pregnant with her third child, right? She had Paul, who's the heir to the throne. She had the daughter that died, and now she's having another, what will eventually be son. So she's pregnant, and she knows her husband, right? She's like, he's dumb as a box of rocks. He's arrogant. He's petulant. Nobody likes him. And she has thought about putting her son Paul on the throne and being his like guardian until he comes into adulthood, because I think he's super young. He's got to be like 2 at this time, something like that. And so she has thought about that, but she has also thought about just being the czar herself, right? Unfortunately, when Elizabeth dies and Peter grabs the throne, she's pregnant with her third affair baby. And so which she's trying to keep a secret, right? Because she and Peter's relationship has devolved to the point where she thinks that he's not gonna claim to be the dad anymore, and has been like laying cover for her, at least in that way. Anywho, so she can't step in, but also, let's be so honest here. You've heard the phrase, when your enemies are making mistakes, don't interrupt them. Peter is making mistake after mistake after mistake. The alliance with Prussia, alienating the Russian army with the uniforms and with letting go of this land that they worked so hard to get, with alienating the Orthodox Church and the priests. Ooh, and he has a mistress that he is proclaiming far and wide. He's going to divorce Catherine and marry this empress that everybody thinks is just like this tavern wench, right? She's just ugly and uncouth and full of her. She is Peter, but in female form. And everybody's looking around like, why would you prefer this woman over Catherine, who's amazing and educated and enlightened and full of life and humor and goodwill, and you're picking that bitch? And she's gonna be our, say it again, empress? Gross. Ew, no, don't like it. Okay, so Peter makes a bunch of mistakes in a row with the army, the church, and this mistress thing, and like divorce is not super approved of, right? So this idea that he would set Catherine aside is not appreciated. And he has said this whole thing about how he's giving this land back to Prussia in the name of peace. And then what does he do immediately thereafter? He goes to war with the Dutch because he wants control of Holstein, his childhood home, which has zero political power or influence for Russia, no positioning, no nothing, only personal gain. Dude, if I was a Russian, I would set fire to his house. Are you shitting me? Oh my Lord. So Elizabeth dies in December. Peter ascends takes over the position, and then he decides that he's going to go march on Holstein. Can't remember if he's going to march or if he's going to go visit the King of Prussia. No, he's going to go march on Holstein, and he brings the army with him, and he brings his mistress with him. And the King of Prussia is like, hold on, homie. Pause that thought. Maybe before you leave Moscow and leave Russia and the fatherland, you should put some precautions in place to make sure nobody takes over the throne while you're gone. And Peter's like, nah, I'm good. Who's gonna do that? Nah. You have to remember, this dude is dumb. Like, I feel bad for him. His childhood was horrible, but he's a little kid in an adult's body that likes to play with toys and thinks he's brilliant and smart until he bumps up into reality once in a while and is checked and is told, no, dude, step back. Like, he lives in delusion. And like this fantasy world or something. And so the King of Prussia is like, okay, if you're not going to put some precautions in place, will you at least, before you leave your country, maybe be coronated? So you're like officially the Tsar of Russia? So they couldn't like put Paul, your son, or somebody on the throne? Like, go through the coronation. Like, Elizabeth died in December. It's now May. There is no reason to delay the coronation. Just do the coronation before you go get Holstein, right? And what does Paul say? Nah, I'm good. Who's gonna do that? Like, he will listen to no and there were other warnings too. Like as it was getting closer, like people were sending him letters being like, I think this is gonna happen. Like, he hadn't even left Russia yet, and he was getting letters that were like, uh-oh, maybe you should come back. And he was like, nah, I'm good. So he's traveling west with his army and his mistress, and the people who support Catherine and love her come to her and say, now's the time. And Catherine has now, at this point, given birth, right? Because it's been months. And so she looks like she's not just had an affair baby, right? Or she isn't pregnant anymore. So nobody's going to be asking that question. Anyway, so she runs to Moscow. She walks into the palace and everyone cheers. She takes over the throne without a single ounce of bloodshed because, frankly, people are fucking grateful. Huzzah! But but Peter is still alive, right? And Peter still thinks that he's the Tsar. He's the uncoronated Tsar of Russia. And she's like, nope, I'm in the palace. It's mine now. And so she's like, we need him to abdicate. And we need him to not leave Russia, because if he gets into Prussia, the king of Prussia is going to use him as a rallying point to get him back into Russia and to be the Tsar, right? So he needs to physically, like, Peter needs to be able to not leave Russia. And so she leads the charge and she goes after Peter and she tries to find him. And long story short, she finds him and his mistress, and that man gives up immediately. I hope the picture that I had painted of this meek human would not make you think that he would suddenly rally and have a ton of courage and strategy and battle plans, because if you were hoping that this was going to be like a Phoenix rising from the ashes story for Peter, no. He gives up. He acts like a petulant child, like he always has. And he frankly gives up the throne as if he's a child being sent to bed without dinner. Like, he's sad about it. We don't wanna. Oh, you're gonna make me. Okay, I do what you say. Darn it. And he writes an abdication of the throne and says, officially, like, I abdicate the throne. He gives it to Catherine. Catherine has this secured. So she sends him off to the beautiful countryside, lovely castle or manor, whatever it is, with her guards that she appoints to watch over him, protect him, make sure that he doesn't escape, but also lives a decent life. So he's basically a political prisoner as she takes over. Oopsie, he dies. I should say that differently. Oopsie, he's killed. Catherine actually doesn't want that to happen. She doesn't want Peter to be killed because she knows that on the political world stage, that's going to put a sour taste in everybody's mouth, right? And she does not want him murdered. She does not want him killed. She makes that pretty evident and obvious. She hasn't totally figured out what to do with him, but she knows that she wants him to be rendered harmless so that nobody like the King of Prussia can use him as a pawn and try to get him back on the throne. She just wants him to be like harmless and die in a ripe old age. That doesn't happen. He's killed like 7 days later. And the problem is, even though she doesn't want that to happen, she appointed the people in charge of ensuring his safety and guarding him, and they're the ones that killed him. It's really unclear how he died. I think everybody was drunk and it was just a skirmish, but it is possible that it was a premeditated homicide. Again, historians don't know, and it's not like anybody at the time was writing like, and I killed the Tsar, right? So you kind of have to guess. But for all intents and purposes, it does seem that Catherine didn't want him to die. But I mean, his death also doesn't suck for her. You know, she doesn't have to worry about him ever again. It puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth on, like, it, you know, for France and Austria, her allies, right? Because she's not BFF with Prussia. That was Peter's job. They were divided in more ways than one. They were divided by personality and by politics. Catherine has the same politics as Elizabeth and is connected to Austria and France, not Prussia. Anywho, So Catherine is like, well, shit. Now Peter's dead. My husband is dead. And so she orders an autopsy. And the autopsy says that he died of colic, which the author, Robert Massie of Catherine the Great, he dies of colic, which some, like, how does he say it? Some people believe, most people don't. Nobody cares. That's it's brutal but true. So now Catherine has ascended to the throne. She is the Tsar of Russia. Her son, Paul, is the heir to the throne. And again, Paul is still like in the toddler stages in 8 years. She doesn't have any specific enemies who could take over the throne, but she does need to, it's time for her to rule. That's what I'm trying to say. It is time for her to rule and rule well. Because if you think about the story as far as I have read it, we've gone from her childhood in Germany to being brought to Russia by her aunt Elizabeth, then engaged to the nephew Peter, suffered terribly in the many years of marriage to him, had Paul, the heir to the throne, Elizabeth dies, Peter abdicates and then dies, and now Catherine has positioned herself as the Tsar of Russia and needs to be coronated, not like the dumbass Peter that didn't do that in a timely manner. Okay. But if you think about that, she's literally just sat her ass on the throne. I'm halfway through this novel, and I still don't know, biography, I should call it. It's not a novel, it's a biography. I'm halfway through, and I don't know why we call her Catherine the Great. I assume that she brings enlightenment, education, free thinking, philosophy, probably some laws that are incredibly important and influential to Russia. Like, I assume it's a very rough and tough place, and she brings philosophy, light, and joy to it. But I don't know that because she's literally just sat her butt down in the chair and said, I'm the Tsar. And she's what, like 34 or something like that? She lives to be a ripe old age. I think she's got like another 34 years to go and to rule and to reign. But now we're getting to the great part. Like, you can see the seeds of who she is, her education, her personality, her strategic thinking and wit and political maneuvering when she's in, she gets married at 17, and throughout her 20s, she's learning and growing. And now she's in her mid-30s and ready to rule. So we need to see the fruits of that young life come to fruition and how she becomes an empress that's known as one of the greats. And I can't tell you why, because I'm only halfway through the book. So I am going to pause there. I'll read the second half of the book, and I will give you the second half of the book report, which shouldn't be too long because I read, as far as I've read, which is about 300 pages, in like 3 days. Like, it's that good. It is that good. And so I imagine that I'll read the second half just as quickly. Again, this is Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman, a biography by Robert Massie. And if you want to hear about the second half, then like or subscribe. I have a video going, so if you're seeing me on YouTube, that's because hello there. But I've got a computer down here because I'm trying to record it as a podcast as well, because especially for long videos, sometimes it's really nice to do that. Anywho, if you want to hear the second, then like, subscribe, comment on either YouTube or this podcast, and we'll go from there. Okay, until next time, ciao for now.